Hey, this is Joe, and welcome back for another video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to hitch up the exhaust control valve. If you remember, in the last video, we took the exhaust system back off, and we ran a borescope down through the top of the headers and down to see if we can figure out what position this valve is in. And using the Haynes manual and some diagrams, we were able to find that if you turn the valve, the butterfly valve here in the exhaust header all the way to the left till it just stops. Now you can keep on twisting and it'll go all the way around. What you want to do is just keep on turning it to the left till it stops. That is the fully closed position right there. Now the manual indicates that the way the exhaust control valve works is when you turn on the ignition key, this valve is supposed to rotate from the fully closed position to the fully open position and then back 30 degrees. Now those angles are dependent upon which model you have. I have the L1 and above, so that is the specifications. Now your bike, depending on which model it is, may have a different positioning, but it always goes from fully closed to open and then back a certain number of degrees. And on my bike, the L1 and above, it goes from fully closed, fully open, back 30 degrees. Notice we have the oxygen sensor mounted, and before you put this in, you want to put some anti-seize compound on those threads. That way, if you ever have to pull that out, it will come out pretty easy. You don't want to have to be wrenching on that thing and break those sensors. They're very expensive. So we have our components here to put the valve back together. We have a little retaining ring here, and how that goes is it goes on like this with the little cap facing upward, and the purpose of that is to keep the spring seated properly. You have your cable piece and stops. This is a stop, that is a stop, that's your fully closed stop, that is your fully open stop. Then you have a spring retainer right here. So how this works is you put the spring on, and you want to put the spring on so that the top of the spring, and this is in the back position, rests on this tab, the left hand side of that tab. And then what you're going to do is the two holes for the cable sections that grab onto the cable will be all the way to your left position. So you want to find your little spring holder. Notice the position of the butterfly valve here. You want to take this with the spring to the left of the tab, and then what you want to do is you want to take your spring, put the bottom lever on, and then what you want to do is rotate this until and notice the holes. Okay, what will happen is that spring, when it's tensioned, will first hold this in the closed position. Then when the servo, when you turn the key on, it's going to go against spring pressure, and it's going to go all the way to the open position, and then it's going to come back somewhere in this vicinity, which they claim, at least on my bike, is 30 degrees. So what you want to do at this point, if you let go of this, it's going to spring out and fly all over the place. So you want to take your locking tab, which is right here. You want to put this on like this, and you have to hold it with one hand, otherwise this spring is going to push this cable section here. It's going to fly off on you. So put that on. You want to get your nut, and you want to then screw that nut on. Till it's snug. We'll tighten this up later. Notice now that the lower portion of the spring is on your spring retainer. The upper spring is to the left of the tab. The butterfly valve is now being held in the closed position. When you turn the ignition on, it's going to rotate to the open position and then back however many degrees the specs for your bike shows. Okay, so we have that. That's how you mount the butterfly valve retainer clip and spring, and that's how the butterfly is going to rotate. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get the exhaust control valve servo, which mounts up top in where the engine compartment is, and there's a set of brackets that will mount that on. Then there's a series of cables with adjusters, and there's a bracket here that holds that. I'm going to show you how to mount that, and then we're going to, when we get power onto the bike, we're going to then adjust those adjusters so that this butterfly valve is going to operate properly. And there's some troubleshooting instructions in the Haynes manual that will show you there's a wire jumper that you can plug into the wiring harness, and you can then test the servo control exhaust servo controller so that it operates. It's supposed to travel in both directions, first this direction and then that direction. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to replace the servo controller, and I'm sure that's a very expensive piece. So we'll hitch that up here in a second. Right now I'm going to go clean up the servo controller and get it all ready. We'll mount that, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. We've taken the cables off of the servo, and we've gone through and we've wire brushed them to clean off the crud and the rust. Now, according to the Haynes manual, there is a part number on each cable. As you see here, it's 14J0CL. According to the Haynes manual, this is the cable that mounts to the top of the servo and to the top of the bracket that goes to the butterfly valve. The other cable is 14J00P. This cable is the lower cable and goes to the lower bracket on the butterfly valve. So these part numbers are again for the L1. If you have a different model, you want to check the manual, because the part numbers on these cables will be slightly different. So we now have the cables identified on where they go. Top of the servo and bottom of the top of the servo and top of the butterfly valve cable connector, and the other one is bottom of the servo and bottom of the butterfly valve cable retention piece. So now what we're going to do is we have the actual servo here. So we're going to clean this up. We're going to remount the cables on the cable connector here, and then we can go over to the bike, and I'm debating on whether to put this servo controller on the bike now, or wait until after I mount the airbox. So I'm at least going to get the cables mounted up, and the cables mounted to the butterfly valve cable connector, and then we just may leave this loose so out of the way, so when we put the throttle bodies and the airbox back on, we'll have a little bit more space, but we'll have the cables connected on the bottom. Then after everything is assembled, then we will go through with the cable adjusters, and we'll adjust the cables properly according to what the Haynes manual say. So let's go mount these, let's clean up this servo controller, and then we're going to go ahead and mount the cables back onto the cable connector here. Route the cables down to where the header is and the butterfly valve is, and we'll mount the cables there. And then we'll just leave this unit loose until we get everything assembled back in the airbox area. Okay, now let's reconnect the cables to the servo. This is the 14J0CL cable. It goes to the top of the cable connector, or the upper cable connector. And what we're going to do is underneath, you're going to slide that into the slot from underneath, and then you're going to wrap the cable around the, looks like there's a little spool area here, and down into a slot there. So we're going to mount that, and there's a little retaining clip that we will put on once we get both cables on. I'll show you how that's going to go. Okay, now we're going to get the other cable, and this cable is the 14J00P, and on the L1 model, which is what I have, that goes in the lower position. So let's go ahead and mount that. And again, you mount from the bottom. You run the little barrel connector around the cable. Okay, and then I'm going to get the clip here in a second. I'll show you how that clip is going to mount. We have the cables mounted on the cable. I guess you want to call that a bracket. There's a little clip here, and this clip goes over this piece of plastic, and there's holes here to route the cables through on the upper and the lower. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the little spring clip here, and we're going to push these in as tight as we can go here. Now this is going to be a little tough. I'm probably going to have to use a pair of needle nose pliers to do this properly. So now we have the bracket, or the spring clip, mounted to this bracket portion here, and then there's a little snap portion over each of the cables here. So now the cables are mounted. Let's go over to the bike again, and we will route, what you have to do is route this along the side of the motor, and then down. Again, we'll leave the servo loose because we want it out of the way for when we mount all the area, all the parts around the area of the airbox. So let's go over and mount the lower portions of the cable down onto the butterfly valve. Here we're up into the airbox area. You notice there is a mounting point here and a mounting point here. So this is how the servo is going to be mounted. But for the time being, we're going to just let this sit up here because I need to get in and put everything back in. There's a bunch, all your injectors here. You have to route your spark plug coils and wires down through to the harness. So I'm going to leave this just loose for the time being because I want to get this airbox all assembled and tidied. So let's move down to the side and look how I've routed the cables there. We have here, you can see up here where the servo is lying. Here's the cables, the upper cable and the lower cable. We routed it down through the side of the cylinder head here. And I'll show you how we're going to route it down lower. So here we're looking down back to where the butterfly valve, the oxygen sensor, and there's a bracket right here. So if you notice, there's a bolt and a tab right here. So we can then mount this bracket for the cables down here. We'll put a nut on there and tighten that up. And then what we're going to do is eventually we'll come in and we'll mount the cables here on this bracket, mount it to the butterfly valve. The upper cable and the lower cable will go down here and we'll tie in to the butterfly valve. So let's go ahead and attach this bracket, and we'll put some Loctite on here, and then we'll mount and route the cables around the butterfly valve. This is a 10mm nut, and we're going to come in and we're going to tighten that up. Now it's just a matter of routing the cables to the butterfly valve, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. This is the top cable. Notice there's an adjuster nut here, and there's an adjuster nut here, and then this is your tension adjuster. So what you want to do first off is take your cable. Now this is the upper cable. You're going to come in and you're going to put the barrel into the slot, and you're going to route the cable around to the right on the top. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put the nut back behind the mounting bracket here, and then what you're going to do is you're going to come in and we can then tighten and notice we can come in and we'll check the looseness here. Notice it's still a little loose, so we want to take some of this slack out of this butterfly valve cable here. And again, this is the upper cable. So what we're going to do is we want to make sure the cable is taut while still having this tab. This is a limit stop tab here. We want this tab to be up against this fixed tab here. So this is the fully closed position. Then the servo will move the cable to the open position. So what we want to do is tighten this up And let me get the right wrench here. Okay, that is a 9mm, so it looks like we're going to need a 10mm wrench. So let me go get a 10mm wrench. The adjuster nut is 8mm. You can slightly loosen your lock nut here, and then you can expand and adjust to take the tension out of that cable. Again, notice you want to keep an eye on the limit tab resting up against the fixed tab. So we don't want to be too far away from that tab. So we want that tab to be touching, the limit stop to be touching this tab right here. So you can adjust with your 8mm wrench to make sure that is okay. And then once you get that set, you can take your 10mm wrench Notice now we have the limit stop resting up against the fixed tab. We have that, and then we've tightened the lock nut onto the cable adjuster. We'll do this eventually when we do an operational check. We may have to do some minor adjustments, but for the time being, this is going to be good. Then we'll take the bottom cable, and the same thing, we're going to take the barrel, cable barrel, run it through the bottom, and then what we want to do is run our cable and notice that's a bit loose. So what we're going to do is make some adjustments on the adjuster here. And we'll take some of the slack out of that lock nut. And looks like what we're going to have to do is make some adjustments on this lock nut because we've run out of the travel on that adjuster. So what we're going to do is run this nut down some more. And then that way we'll have some adjusting room on this adjuster here. And notice now we've taken some of the slack out of that cable. So now we can run the lock nut up, and again that's a 10mm on the lock nut. Okay. We may have to do a little bit tighter on the upper portion there, but you get the idea. We'll come back and we'll do some minor adjustments when we mount the servo to the frame, and then when we do an operational check, we may have to do some minor tweaking on these adjusters here. But for now, this will be good. We have the exhaust control valve mounted properly. We have the upper cable in the number 1 spot, the lower cable in the lower spot, and the same thing on the servo. The upper cable is on the number 1 spot, the lower cable is on the number 2 spot. So we have our servo and our butterfly adjusted. Again, I'm going to leave the servo loose for the time being until we finish up in the airbox area. And hope you enjoyed this video. By using the Borescope, I've hopefully saved you from having to go either buy one or rent one to determine where the close position is on this exhaust control valve. So we'll see you next time.